Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. It was day 23 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and they went for a fairly full day today. There was a very short presentation of a foundational document on the emergency response team activities on the night of April 18th and morning of April 19th, 2020. But most of the day, the bulk of the day, was spent on two witnesses. There was Corporal Tim Mills, who at the time was the head of the Emergency Response Team, or ERT is how they're called. That's basically the Canadian version of a SWAT team. So the Emergency Response Team, ERT. Corporal Tim Mills was the head of the ERT at the time. And then Corporal Trent Milton is currently the head, and the reason he's currently is because Corporal Tim Mills has quit the RCMP over some of the actions that took place during the mass casualty and subsequent treatment by the RCMP of him and his team that was unacceptable to him. Actually, he used the word disgusting. So we'll come to some of that. The other thing, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the procedural things that happened today, and I think the Mass Casualty Commission commissioners have been listening a little bit to the criticism or the advice, however you want to put it, that people have been providing to them, and there was a little more of a rigorous procedure today. There was more cross-examination specifically, so I'll talk about that as well. First thing I want to mention, I guess, though, is you may have seen the front page of the Chronicle Herald today, an article written by Andrew Rankin where I was interviewed and talking about some of these issues, and I said it was the beginning of the end for the RCMP in Nova Scotia. Well, that's assuming that people are paying attention, are watching and seeing what those that are certainly paying attention have been seeing about the performance of the RCMP throughout the commission proceedings. And then, many of the other things that have come up in their communications to the public during the mass shooting and then subsequent to that. So I encourage you to check out that article. And it was just, probably not a coincidence or anything, but today we heard some really stinging criticisms of the RCMP from two RCMP members, one of whom, as I said, has quit in protest. But it was interesting. Now, they testified as a panel, Tim Mills and Trent Milton. And so, of course, I'm watching to see how that operates and whether the panel structure was an effective way to examine witnesses. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. Today, I thought it actually worked fairly well. We were able to see there was two very different personalities, although you could see that they would worked well together. We had Corporal Tim Mills, who has quit the RCMP, has nothing to lose by coming in and telling the truth, and certainly didn't hold back, pull his punches or anything like that. Was very critical, was clearly angry about some things that had taken place with the treatment of his team by the RCMP after the shootings, and so he certainly testified about that. And then some of the shortcomings of the RCMP from a technological perspective, and some of the frustrations that he expressed in all of those regards. So that was interesting. Now, on the other hand, we had Corporal Milton, who was much more measured in his words. Like, he wouldn't, Tim Mills was using words like disgusting and corrupt and cover up. Well, Trent Milton didn't say any of those words, but he was very critical all the same, and did so. It was interesting. You would see Tim Mills would say something, and come out and just say something in a very plain way, and then it would go to Corporal Milton, and you think, well, he's calm, he's sitting there, maybe he's going to correct him or say no. He would usually support him with just yes and all this, particularly when they were talking about the technological capacity of the RCMP and the gear that ERT should have had available to them at that time. They're going into an area where they don't know the roads, they don't know the layout, and they did not have GPS capabilities in their vehicle, which led to, for example, them having to call Staff Sergeant Rahill to try to get directions through some of the area. And then a crucial part of this, I can't overstate this, I guess, operational software that they would usually use is called ATTAK. That's ATAK, and it stands for Android Team Awareness Kit. This is something that is used by ERT squads throughout the country, and it allows them to track each officer on a individualized GPS basis, and so it allows more officers to be engaged in a situation because you can track where people are going. There's less of a concern of officer on officer shooting and all those sorts of things. So that was they were both very frustrated by that and expressed that. So that hadn't been working. They'd been given new phones, but the ATAK system hadn't been installed or hadn't been properly installed. Anyway, it wasn't functional at that time, and they were both very frustrated by that. The other part was the helicopter. Now, the RCMP have a helicopter, and it has the capacity to use infrared sensing to tell where heat sources are coming from on the ground below. Very handy in a situation like this, particularly where people may be hiding in the woods or anywhere in a difficult to see area at night. Operating at night, you can do this without and still be able to find people. Well, they were able to. They weren't able to use the helicopter because it was out of service and no backup and no effective backup plan was in place. They ended up using the DNR helicopter a little bit the next morning, although they really didn't get any good use out of that helicopter at all, which is kind of shocking. Anyway, we'll hear more about the helicopter usage, but it seems very strange that it wasn't of more use during the early morning hours of April 19th. So in lieu of having a helicopter and in lieu of all the GPS, one thing they did have was a drone, and Corporal Milton was able to use that, and that did have heat. It could detect heat signals as well. Now, they have better ones now than they did even 2 years ago, but he did, in Portapique, send the drone up, saw some heat signals from animals, but no people. He was asked later in cross-examination whether it was in the area where Lisa Banfield was alleged to have been hiding out overnight, and he wasn't sure. So I was looking for that as well to see if there was if they covered a particular area where she says she was hiding and there was no heat signal found. Well, of course that would be significant, but we didn't get to drill down enough on that to get to the specific area where he covered. They did not know about the Blueberry Road or a potential use of it, so when they were trying to search the area and find out where Wortman was located in Portapique when they thought he was still there, they didn't realize that there was another way out. It seemed just from listening to Tim Mills talk about their planning, I mean, once they realized that Wortman was out of the Portapique community, they did have vehicles stationed at different exit points throughout, but just didn't get it right. Well, weren't able to get them. The other thing that came out actually was, I saw it in the Halifax Examiner. It wasn't really commented upon today in the testimony that I saw, at least, was the potential access that the killer had to unencrypted radio channels. And there was some times throughout the night between, I think, 12:45 and 4 in the morning, just a little after 4, and then between 7:20 and 11:42, when there was some access to unencrypted channels. Potential for that the killer was aware then of some of the locations of officers, so we'll see if more details on that emerge. So the first part of their frustration was the technological incapabilities, lack of capabilities of the RCMP, and so they went through those. And Corporal Mills actually expressed that he was not surprised by the lack of air support. He said the helicopter seems to be down more than it's available, and so there's another issue as well that's going to have to be covered. But his biggest issue was not during, but afterwards. And he was asked about mental health supports, and Corporal Mills said the way they were treated after the incident was disgusting. He was looking as the team leader to allow some time for his team to decompress. They would still be at work. The idea was for them to go to work, do administrative and prepare reports, do things that need to be done, but then be in the same space together. So, use the advice of keep together, keep busy, be around like-minded people. This was very much like the good advice that was provided during the Desmond inquiry. And there was a colleague of Corporal Desmond's, Corporal Orlando Trotter, who said, when they come back from battle, they get 3 days in Cyprus to, lay on a beach, and then they're home and everybody's dispersed in different directions. He thought that was really a big problem. We heard from psychiatrists as well about, you should keep people together for a longer period of time. Well, that's what Corporal Mills was trying to do, and his efforts were rejected by his superior officers, despite the RCMP psychiatrist supporting it initially, but wouldn't support it later. So he had all kinds of issues with the treatment. And on the ERT team, there's 13 members, 5 of whom are full-time and the others are part-time. I think I have that right. Or it could be vice versa. About half are part-time, half full-time. And the part-timers mean they are part-time on the ERT squad, but also part-time doing general duty. So some of them were called back to work general duty work and were thus separated from the team. And, Corporal Mills said, look, he was a permanent member, so he wasn't going to be sent anywhere. But he was thinking about these part-timers, as he called them, and felt bad. And it sounds like he was right. That's certainly the PTSD advice that I've become familiar with through the Desmond inquiry. He also, when he was talking about corruption and cover-ups, that was in reference to the 2 officers who were tasked with doing issues management for the RCMP in terms of the Mass Casualty Commission were married to senior RCMP officers. And that's been covered. I know Paul Palango has written about that. And that was eventually, that decision to have those 2 officers be the issues management people was eventually reversed. But he said, you just can't do that. That's an organizational culture issue. So that was interesting. And that was something he spoke about in cross-examination as well. So just to mention cross-examination. So what I've been saying throughout some of these interviews I've done and videos is the way that cross-examination has been working in the Mass Casualty Commission has been very problematic. You have usually the lawyers for the various parties, and there's like 10 of them there, have to collaborate, pick one lawyer to ask the questions for everybody. And then, there seems to be a time limit. There seems to be supervision of those meetings by commission counsel, which to me is completely inappropriate. Well, today there seemed to have been a little bit of flexibility exercised because we had cross-examination from Rob Pinio from Patterson Law. We had cross-examination in addition to that from Tara Miller from MDW. And then we also had Josh Bryson from Chester Law do cross-examination. So I thought that was interesting. Also very interesting, I thought that the lawyers for the federal government and the police federation did not have any questions. There certainly didn't seem to be any of the questions asked in cross-examination that, seemed to have come from the police. And there was no indication that they had provided input on questions. So here we are, we have 2 officers, corporals, one still serving, highly critical of the RCMP, and yet the federal lawyers and RCMP union lawyers have no questions for them. So thought that was interesting. Final thought is just on, I was thinking about this, and this was not raised at all today, but I thought it was an interesting possibility that here we have Corporal Mills, who is retired from the RCMP, seems intent on voicing his criticism. Okay. If this killer, if Wortman was an agent or an informant or some tight relation to the RCMP, it strikes me as possible and maybe even likely that during the hunt for him, that the ERT squad, who was really the elite part of the RCMP force, would have been told that you should know this guy is connected to us in some way. And, I'm not sure how that would, maybe it wouldn't have been relevant. Maybe they wouldn't have been told, but it strikes me that they may have been. Okay. And further, if they were, it seems likely that Tim Mills may have been inclined to say something like that today, and he said nothing like that. So that's not conclusive, but to me, it's meaningful in some ways. So those were some of the thoughts that I had emerging from the evidence today. An interesting day, very critical day for the RCMP. That is to say, people were very critical of the RCMP, not only in the media, but on the stand, and I think that's going to continue. The next 2 days, we're going to hear from other retired RCMP officers. So that might be interesting. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Staff Sergeant Steve Halliday, who was certainly instrumental early on in the situation. Wednesday, we're going to hear from Staff Sergeant Jeff West and Staff Sergeant Kevin Surrett, both of whom are also retired. So, given that status of being retired, will that make them more inclined to be truthful and critical as Corporal Mills was today? We'll see. We'll find out. So until then, those are my thoughts for today, day 23 of the Mass Casualty Commission. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.